Thank you very much. Once again, I come up here wondering if I'm going to be able to see over the microphone, and I'm so relieved that I can. So I just want to start by thanking everybody for coming here tonight and choosing to be part of this conversation. It's so important that we have community come together to have this important conversation about how to not be a bystander and how to stand up. I stand here tonight as a fellow advocate, someone who has been speaking about issues like domestic and sexual violence and human trafficking for the past 13 plus years, but I also stand here tonight as a survivor. There are so many stories that I could share about my personal experiences, but I want to begin by sharing about one memory that I've never quite been able to shake. And that memory isn't about a certain experience that happened to me or anything traumatic like that. It's actually about an object that I remember growing up. And that was a sticker that was plastered on the back of my bedroom wall behind my bed. I don't know where that sticker came from, but to this day, I can remember the 6 words on that sticker, which was, "Every child deserves a safe home." And that sticker, I used to spend so much time looking at it. And I remember as a young girl and then growing into a teenager, wishing that I could invent this magical necklace that would have this secret little audio recording button that I could press at any moment, and it would capture the reality of what was happening in our home, and that it would send a signal to the police and that they would turn up immediately and arrest my dad, and that I'd be able to prove what was happening. Because as a young girl growing up in the late 1990s to the early 2000s, we didn't have any awareness or really much understanding at all outside of movies about domestic violence. We only ever saw it as that horrific end result. Nobody was talking about coercive control. Nobody was talking about emotional abuse. And so for a lot of my young life, as you heard a little bit about in the bio, I really lived in silence, and my story was buried inside me. Now, I'm not going to share too much about my story tonight, but what I do want to focus on is the importance of taking a stand. And when I think back to myself as a young woman, I particularly want to share tonight some of those people who took a stand for me and my family, and later on for me as I went into unhealthy relationships as a young woman, to highlight what it can look like to take a stand and the different ways that we can do that. When I think back, one woman that I remember in particular was a woman in my mother's church. Her name was Alda. And there came a day where my mum decided that she was going to break the silence, and she opened up to this woman in our church and told her about what was happening at home and that she just couldn't handle it any longer. Now, on that day, Alda could have responded in many different ways. She could have done what unfortunately some people do within the church. She could have responded with platitudes. She could have told my mother, God never gives us anything more than we can handle. She could have told her, just hold in there, God's got you. Or she could have responded, as some people have to many of my clients over the years, of, you just need to forgive and move on. But she didn't respond in that way. Instead, she took a stand for us, and she offered something that changed our lives. Now, what we found out shortly after that was that Alda and her husband had a spare property that they were going to be developing later that year. And she said to my mum, I want you to take that property for now, and I want you to take the kids and go there. And that place was really a safe haven for us. It couldn't solve the immediate problem. It didn't make my dad disappear. And as many survivors know, we were at an increased risk of violence and harm during that time as we made our escape. But what it did for me was to give me a chance to breathe, a chance to feel that maybe I could keep going just that little bit longer, that maybe there was going to be an end to this one day. Now, I know that not everybody has a spare property. I mean, I'm sure a lot of us wish we could do that for someone, but there are many different things we can do, and I will share some other examples. But for us, that was an amazing gift that was given to us. as I said, we were given that property to stay in for a certain amount of time. It was meant to be 3 months. It ended up being closer to a year. But eventually we did have to go back home. There was nowhere else that my mother felt that we could go at that time. And so we did go home. And as was shared earlier, you know, that violence did escalate. And I feel very lucky to be here today, because in hindsight, when I look back, I see that we could have been the next Hannah Clark family, particularly with the way that my dad's violence was escalating. And so I never take it for granted when I you know, am able to share my story all across the world, because not every survivor has this opportunity. And I think if my dad was still around, it may have been more difficult for me to do the work that I do today. So I want to acknowledge that. But what are some other ways that people can take a stand? So I want to share some other stories of positive stories of people that have taken a stand for me throughout my life. So I think back to those times where I was still at home with my dad, and I think of one of my school teachers and the way that she really stepped up to support me. She didn't know all of what was going on, but she knew I was going through something. And for her to, you know, come to me and say, Jas, I just wanted to give you some extra notes to help you as you approach, you know, your Year 12 exams. And I've also given you an extension. And if you need another extension, you just let me know. That may not sound like anything much, but that was life-saving to me. Again, she wasn't fixing the situation. So often we think that to take a stand, we have to get the victim out of that situation and rescue them. But she did what she could, and that was life-changing for me, because again, it lightened the load. I also think of one of my friends and her family who offered for me to come and stay with them as we were preparing for our Year 12 exams, so that I had that peaceful environment around me and I could really focus and do my best. And then I also think of a situation after school when I, like many young women who've experienced abuse from their fathers, I went into many unhealthy relationships, and one of those ended in a sexual assault. And I think of one of my friends at that time, and she made it very clear to me that she did not approve of me spending time with this person. But what she didn't do was to disown me. She didn't say, that's it, I'm not going to be your friend anymore if you keep hanging out with this person. I'm not going to be your friend, unless you break it off with him. She didn't do that, but she did make it clear that she didn't think it was a good idea for me to be seeing him. When that relationship did end badly and the worst did happen, I opened up to her about what had happened, and she was the first person to say, well, she was actually the only person to say to me, that wasn't your fault, that was rape. And it doesn't matter how much he love bombed you the next day, what he did was wrong. And that's something that I've never forgotten, even though I'm not close to that person now. She was there to take a stand for me and to listen, to let me know that she was there, and to let me know that I was not at fault. And that's a message that I really want to make sure that we really listen to tonight and take up, because not being a bystander and taking a stand, sometimes we think that means, as I said earlier, that we have to either jump in and rescue the person, get them out of that situation immediately, or we might think of, witnessing domestic violence in public and that we have to get into the middle of that and get the victim out of that situation. And the reality is not all of us are equipped to do that, and it's not safe for many of us to do that. So I want to share 2 specific examples of ways that I've taken a stand for survivors in the past, and some things I do differently. So I did have a situation in the past where I witnessed domestic violence happening in public, and I did go up to that woman and ask if I could support her, if she wanted to come with me into a shop that was across the road. What ended up happening was I got enmeshed within what was happening, and it was a very volatile situation, and could have ended very badly for me. I look back and think, I acted with my intuition in that moment, but maybe I should have gone to a local shop and just let them know what was happening, asked if they could have called the police, or if they had security on site that could have done something. Another situation that I was in last year was I was in a shopping centre. I witnessed a young couple, and I could see that the young woman was really upset and something was just not right. The vibes were just not not on with what was going on there. But I had my son with me, and there was no way I was going to get myself involved in whatever was happening. But I also didn't want to walk off and just go, oh, well, I can't do anything, so I'm sure it'll all be fine. So what I did was just to go to one of the info booths and ask them, can you send, one of your security or some of your security to that area to just keep an eye on what's happening. And that's what they did. And, it was done very, inconspicuously. But it's just an example of how we can take a stand when we feel something is not right, when we see something is not right. That doesn't have to always require us to put ourselves in a potentially dangerous situation. And the last message that I really want to share is one that I shared in Hannah Clark's community the day after the murder of Hannah and her 3 children. And that is that it is so much better for us to speak up and say something if we suspect something is going on and to maybe be wrong, than to say nothing and find out down the track that maybe by speaking up, maybe by calling the police or calling Police Link or whatever it may be, taking a stand, that maybe the outcome could have been different. So I want to encourage you tonight that taking a stand for survivors, it's not about knowing exactly the right thing to say. It's not about having to get yourself into, physical altercations and save the day. But as we heard earlier, it's really important when you suspect or you see that somebody is experiencing domestic violence to let them know that you're there for them. Ask them, is there anything I can do to support you right now? And if they do decide that they are ready to go to the police or go and visit their GP to speak about it, say to them, I'm happy to come with you if you'd like some support. So I just want to thank you again for coming, and just to remind you that, together we can all make a change when it comes to ending domestic violence in our communities. And just finally as well, I speak a lot about, violence against women because obviously it's part of my story. And statistically, we know that women and children are most often the victims. But I also feel it's important to say that we do know that there are, men and boys that experience violence too. And I feel like it's very important to understand that anyone can be a perpetrator and anyone can be a victim. And if you are experiencing an unhealthy relationship, I hope that some of the words that you've heard tonight will give you the courage when you're ready to just tell one safe person, because that might be the first step in your journey to freedom. So thank you very much.